Jack Miller wiped sweat from his forehead as he finished mending the fence around his horse paddock. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his 15-acre ranch, the place he'd called home for nearly 10 years. He loved the quiet life out. Here, just him, his 3 horses, a couple of friendly farm dogs, and enough space to breathe. That peace had lasted right up until 18 months ago, when bulldozers appeared on the neighboring property. "Come on, Rusty," he called to his aging golden retriever. "Let's check the mail before dinner." As Jack walked down his long gravel driveway, he frowned at the view. Where there had once been rolling fields and a small woodland, now stood rows of identical 2-story houses with perfectly manicured lawns. The Sunny Meadows housing development had sprung up practically overnight, bringing with it streetlights that dimmed his view of the stars and the constant background hum of central air conditioning units. But the worst part wasn't the houses. It was the homeowners association, specifically its president. Jack grabbed his mail and was heading back when he spotted the white Range Rover coming up his private road. His stomach tightened. That would be Deborah Whitfield, making her 3rd unwelcome visit this week. "Here we go again, Rusty," he muttered. The dog seemed to sense his tension, pressing against Jack's leg as the expensive SUV pulled up beside them, dust billowing around its gleaming paint. The driver's window slid down, silently, revealing a woman in her 50s with a blonde bob so perfect it barely moved in the breeze. Her sunglasses probably cost more than Jack's best saddle. "Good afternoon," she said, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. "I noticed your fence posts don't match the ones you installed last summer. The HOA board is concerned about consistency." Jack took a deep breath. "Afternoon, Mrs. Whitfield. As I've explained before, my property isn't part of Sunny Meadows. I don't need to follow your rules." "Oh, but curb appeal affects everyone's property values," she replied, her voice sticky sweet. "We're all neighbors here." "Neighbors respect boundaries," Jack said, pointing to the freshly repainted private property sign just 10 feet away. "And that includes physical ones." Deborah's smile tightened. "I'm just trying to help. You know, we have several retired contractors in our community who could give you tips on proper fence installation. My fences keep my horses in just fine, thanks." Jack tried to keep his voice level. "Now I've got chores to finish before dark." Of course. She made a show of checking her diamond-studded watch. "I'll just take a quick look at that shed you're building near the property line. The board has concerns about the sight lines from the Petersons' backyard." Before Jack could object, she'd put the Range Rover in drive and was heading toward his workshop, completely ignoring his shout to stop. This had been the pattern for months now. At first, Deborah would just drive slowly past his property, taking notes. Then came the unsolicited friendly suggestions about his barns peeling paint or the old tractor he kept near his workshop. Soon she was actually coming onto his land, acting like she had every right to inspect whatever caught her eye. Jack hopped into his dusty pickup truck and followed her down the rutted path to his workshop. By the time he arrived, Deborah was already out of her vehicle, clipboard in hand, peering through the windows of his half-finished shed. "Mrs. Whitfield," he called out firmly. "You need to leave. Now." She turned, eyebrows raised in mock surprise. "I'm just looking. These metal roofing panels you've chosen reflect sunlight right into the community pool area. It's creating a safety hazard. The pool is a quarter-mile away, through a stand of trees," Jack pointed out. "And more importantly, you're trespassing." "Oh, don't be so dramatic." She waved her hand dismissively. "I'm the HOA president. It's my job to maintain community standards." "Your community ends at that fence line," Jack said, pointing to the clear boundary markers he'd installed last month, after the 3rd time he'd found her wandering around his property. "This is my ranch, not part of Sunny Meadows." Deborah clicked her tongue. "Well, someone has to address these eyesores. Do you realize your property is the first thing people see when they drive into our development? That rusty windmill alone probably knocked $5,000 off the Hendersons' asking price." Jack felt his patience wearing dangerously thin. "The windmill was here long before your houses, and it still pumps water just fine." She sniffed and made another note on her clipboard. As she turned to leave, Jack noticed her stopping to open one of the storage containers near his workshop, the one containing expensive specialized tools he used for leather work. "Hey," he called out sharply. "That's private property." "Just curious what you keep in these eyesores," she replied, letting the lid drop. "You should really consider proper garden sheds. I can recommend a supplier who makes them in colors approved by our board." After she finally left, Jack stormed into his house and pulled up the footage from the security cameras he'd installed last month. Sure enough, there was Deborah, clearly opening his toolbox and even picking up several expensive specialized leatherworking tools before putting them back. The next morning, Jack drove to the sheriff's office and filed a formal complaint about trespassing, complete with the video evidence. The deputy seemed sympathetic but not particularly motivated. "Look, Mr. Miller, I understand she's annoying, but this is really just a neighbor dispute," he said, barely glancing at the footage. "Maybe try putting up more signs?" This was the third complaint Jack had filed. The previous two had been dismissed just as casually. As he drove home, frustration burning in his gut, he realized the usual channels weren't going to solve his problem. That evening, as Jack sat on his porch watching the sunset with a cold beer in hand, he spotted Deborah's white Range Rover doing another slow drive-by of his property. She didn't stop this time, but he could see her pointing things out to another board member sitting in her passenger seat. Rusty whined and pressed against Jack's leg, sensing his rising irritation. "You know what, boy?" Jack said, scratching the dog's ears. "I think it's time we got creative about protecting our home. After all, if the law wouldn't help him keep unwanted visitors off his land, he'd need to take matters into his own hands. Legally? Of course, but with enough ingenuity to send a clear message. And after 20 years as a military engineer, Jack had plenty of ideas for making his property less inviting to trespassers in luxury vehicles. Over the next few weeks, Jack tried everything he could think of to solve the problem properly. He wasn't looking for a fight. He just wanted to be left alone on his own land. First, he wrote a formal letter. He spent a whole evening at his kitchen table, carefully typing up a polite but firm request that Deborah and other HOA members stop entering his property without permission. He printed it on nice paper, signed it with his best pen, and sent it by certified mail to both Deborah and the entire HOA board. That way nobody could claim they didn't know. "That should do it, Rusty," he told his dog as he dropped the letters. "At the post office. People respect official stuff, right? Wrong." 3 days later, Jack's security camera pinged his phone while he was grocery shopping. The footage showed Deborah walking around his barn, taking pictures of his old red tractor. She had completely ignored the brand new "No Trespassing" sign he'd installed just yesterday. Jack tried a different approach. He called a local surveyor to come out and mark his property lines again, even though he already had the original survey from when he bought the place. The surveyor, an older man named Tom with 40 years of experience, placed bright orange stakes along the entire border between Jack's ranch and the Sunny Meadows development. "Nobody can miss these," Tom said, hammering in the last stake. Orange is the universal color for pay attention. Jack paid the $800 bill without complaint. It would be worth every penny if it solved the problem. It didn't. The very next morning, Jack watched through his kitchen window as Deborah stepped right over. The markers wandered over to his firewood pile and started taking notes about how it was stacked. "You've got to be kidding me," Jack muttered, pulling on his boots to confront her. By the time he got outside, she was measuring the distance from his woodpile to the property line with a tape measure she'd brought along. "Good morning, Mrs. Whitfield," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Did you happen to notice all those orange stakes marking private property?" Deborah looked up, seemingly unfazed by being caught. "Oh, Jack, yes, I saw those, but I'm concerned this woodpile might be a fire hazard. It's awfully close to our development. It's 40 yards from the property line, and it's how I heat my house," Jack explained. "I've been stacking wood in this exact spot for 10 years without any problems." "Well, things change," she replied with a tight smile. "Our homeowners have expressed concerns about pests. Woodpiles attract rodents, you know." "On my property," Jack stressed. "Wildlife doesn't respect property lines," she countered. Every conversation with this woman went in circles. Jack took a deep breath. "Mrs. Whitfield, I've sent you an official letter asking you not to come onto my property without permission. You received it 3 days ago. I got the signed receipt back. You're trespassing right now." She waved her hand dismissively. "Oh, that silly letter," So formal. We're neighbors, Jack. Neighbors look out for each other. Then please look out for my privacy and stay on your side of those orange stakes, Jack said firmly. He thought he'd made his point, but the next day brought a new surprise. When Jack went to get his mail, he found an official-looking envelope, stuck to his mailbox with tape. Inside was a notice of violation on Sunny Meadows HOA letterhead. It cited him for improper storage of firewood and excessive vehicle parking in visible areas. The notice gave him 14 days to remedy these violations or face fines. Jack nearly tore the paper in half. His firewood was on his own property. The excessive vehicles were his truck, his old farm tractor, and a horse trailer. All things he needed for his daily life on the ranch. He called his buddy Miguel, who worked as a paralegal at a law firm in town. "They can't fine you," Miguel assured him after hearing the story. "Their HOA has no legal authority over your property if you never signed their covenant. It would be like me trying to give you a speeding ticket. I can write it up, but it doesn't mean anything." "Tell that to Mrs. Whitfield," Jack sighed. "Maybe you should," Miguel suggested. "Have your property deed handy and just calmly explain the legal boundaries." Jack took his friend's advice. The next time he spotted Deborah's Range Rover coming up his driveway, which happened only 2 days later, he was ready with his property deed and a printout of county property records clearly showing his land was not part of the Sunny Meadows development. Deborah barely glanced at the documents. "These old records don't account for the easement," she said confidently. "What easement?" Jack asked, confused. "The one that allows for community access along the road frontage," she replied. "It's in our development plan." "Your development plan doesn't apply to my property," Jack explained for what felt like the 100th time. "I bought this land 10 years ago, long before Sunny Meadows existed." Deborah smiled in a way that made Jack's stomach tighten. "We'll see what the county has to say about that. Our lawyer has already filed the paperwork." After she left, Jack immediately called Miguel again, who promised to look into it. Sure enough, the HOA had actually filed a claim attempting to take control of the first 20 feet of Jack's property along the road, including part of his front pasture, claiming there was an old easement that had never been properly recorded. "This is ridiculous," Jack fumed as he hired a real lawyer to fight the claim. "They're just making things up now." The lawyer, Mrs. Chen, was a no-nonsense woman who specialized in property disputes. "This claim has no merit," she assured Jack, after reviewing his documents. "But we need to respond formally or they could create problems for you down the road." It cost Jack $1,500 to have Mrs. Chen draft and file the necessary legal responses, money he had been saving for a new roof on his barn. The easement claim was quickly dismissed by the county, but the experience left Jack frustrated and angry. Yet Deborah didn't stop. If anything, her intrusions increased. One evening, as Jack was brushing down his favorite horse, Thunder, he heard a car door slam. Through the barn door, he spotted Deborah walking toward his horse paddock with a measuring wheel, the kind surveyors use to measure distances. Jack stepped out of the barn. "Mrs. Whitfield, this needs to stop." She jumped slightly, then composed herself. "Oh, Jack, I'm just checking the setback distance for livestock pens. County code requires—" "County code has never had an issue with my horse paddock in 10 years, Jack interrupted. "And you know full well you have no authority here. As HOA president," she began. "You have zero authority on my property," Jack stated firmly. "Your HOA paperwork ends at those orange stakes. Your regulations don't apply here. Your opinions about my firewood, my vehicles, or my horses don't matter here. You are trespassing again after multiple warnings." For the first time, Deborah looked slightly uncomfortable, but it didn't last long. "Someone has to maintain standards in this area," she sniffed. "Your rustic lifestyle is affecting property values for everyone." "My rustic lifestyle was here first," Jack pointed out. "Anyone who bought a house next to a working ranch should have expected to see horses and tractors." The development brochure clearly showed this entire area as part of the planned community green space, she replied, with walking paths and a duck pond. Jack stared at her, finally understanding. "They sold you a lie, Mrs. Whitfield. The developer never owned my land. Never had an option to buy it and certainly had no right to include it in any brochures. But that's between you and them. It has nothing to do with me. We'll see about that, she said coldly, turning to walk back to her. Range Rover. The board meeting tonight will be very interested to hear about the health code violations I've observed with your animals. As he watched her drive away, Jack realized that logic, legal documents, and polite requests weren't going to solve this problem. The sheriff wouldn't help. The county officials had sided with him on the easement, but they wouldn't do anything about the trespassing. Mrs. Whitfield seemed to believe that through sheer force of will, she could make his ranch part of her perfect, planned community. That evening, Jack sat at his kitchen table reviewing his security camera footage from the past month. There was Deborah, wandering his property at least 3 times a week, looking in windows, opening storage containers, taking photos of his equipment. Once, she even brought another HOA board member along, the two of them pointing at his barn and shaking their heads disapprovingly. Jack took a long sip of his coffee and stared out the window at his land that had been peaceful until 18 months ago, land that he'd worked hard to buy, to maintain, to turn into a home. Enough is enough, he said to himself, an idea taking shape in his mind. He'd tried being reasonable. He'd tried the legal route. Now it was time to try something different. He picked up his phone and called his old army buddy Lee, who had helped him build his workshop. Hey, Lee, Jack said when his friend answered. Remember those field deterrents we used to set up overseas? The non-lethal ones? I think I need something like that for my driveway. The morning after his phone call with Lee, Jack woke up early. He sat at his kitchen table with a notepad, sketching ideas while sipping his coffee. Rusty lay at his feet, occasionally looking up when Jack chuckled to himself. This isn't about revenge, boy, Jack explained to the dog as if Rusty understood every word. It's about boundaries. Sometimes people need physical reminders when they won't listen to words. Jack had spent 15 years as a military engineer before buying his ranch. His specialty had been designing defensive perimeters, ways to keep people out of places they shouldn't be. He'd never imagined he'd need those skills for his own home, but here he was. The important thing was that everything had to be legal. Jack wasn't looking to hurt anyone or damage property. He just wanted to make his land less appealing for unwanted visitors, particularly those in expensive white SUVs. Jack pulled out his old work boots and headed to his workshop. First, he needed to survey his own property, but with different eyes. Not as a homeowner, but as a defensive specialist. His private road was about a quarter-mile long from the county road to his house. It was a simple dirt track, rutted from years of use. Nothing fancy, but it served his needs. Now it would serve another purpose. Jack started with what he called Project Uneven Ground. He spent that first day using his small tractor to strategically regrade certain sections of his driveway. He didn't destroy the road. He just made it more interesting. He created dips and rises where there had been smooth passage. Sure, some sections were narrower than others. Every change was carefully planned. Nothing dangerous, he reminded himself as he worked. Just uncomfortable for low-clearance vehicles. By the end of the day, his driveway looked mostly the same, to the casual observer. But anyone driving a luxury SUV built for smooth city streets would feel every carefully placed bump and dip. They'd have to slow down to a crawl or risk scraping their expensive undercarriage. The next day, Jack's friend Lee arrived with his pickup truck loaded with supplies. You sure about this? Lee asked as they unloaded metal pipes and lumber. Seems like a lot of work just to keep one nosy neighbor away. Jack described the months of intrusions, the legal battle over the fake easement, and showed Lee the security footage of Deborah going through his personal belongings. Okay, I get it now. Lee nodded. So, what's the plan? First, we install cattle guards, Jack explained, pointing to the metal pipes they'd just unloaded. Perfectly normal for a ranch. They keep livestock from wandering off, right? Right, Lee said, catching on to Jack's thinking. And they're also really uncomfortable to drive over in a fancy car. Exactly. Jack grinned. But completely legal. And appropriate for my property. They spent the day digging trenches at the entrance to Jack's property and at another point halfway up the driveway. In each trench, they installed sturdy metal cattle guards, essentially metal pipes spaced a few inches apart over a shallow pit. Livestock wouldn't cross them, but vehicles could drive over. Well, most vehicles. Jack's truck would handle them just fine, but a low-clearance luxury SUV? Those would have to crawl across at a snail's pace, with the pipes making a horrible rattling noise against their expensive undercarriage the whole time. Phase 1 complete, Jack said with satisfaction as they finished the second cattle guard. Tomorrow we work on the water features. The third day brought what Jack called his mud pit engineering. Near his horse washing station, there was a section of the driveway that tended to get soggy after rain. Jack had always meant to fix the drainage there but had never gotten around to it. Now, instead of fixing it, he carefully enhanced it. See, the trick is to make it look natural, he explained to Lee as they reworked the drainage pipes. Nothing obvious, nothing dangerous, just a section of road that happens to be perpetually muddy. They redirected the runoff from the horse washing station to flow under the road and resurface in a specific section, right after a blind curve, where a driver wouldn't see it until they were already committed to the path. The mud wouldn't be deep enough to trap a vehicle completely, but it would be unexpected and messy. Perfect for white cars. Lee chuckled, understanding Jack's plan. And white pants, Jack added, thinking of Deborah's usual pristine outfit. On the fourth day, they installed what Jack called his automatic car wash. This consisted of several motion-activated sprinklers positioned strategically along the edges of the road. To any casual observer, they'd look like normal garden sprinklers meant to keep the dust down on the driveway, but Jack placed them at just the right height and angle that they would spray directly into the open windows of a slow-moving vehicle. The timing was key. They would activate only when a vehicle was right beside them, moving at under 10 miles per hour. The final touch, Jack said on the last day of their work, holding up a bottle of blue powdered dye. Is that what I think it is? Lee asked. Garden-safe, non-toxic, temporary blue dye, Jack confirmed. The kind they use in fountains and ponds. Totally harmless, washes out of fabric with 1 or 2 cycles in the washing machine. But quite startling when it suddenly appears on white clothing. He added the dye to the tank feeding the sprinkler system. The blue tint was barely noticeable in the water, but it would leave distinct blue splotches on anything it sprayed. You're an evil genius, Lee laughed as they tested the system, watching as the motion sensors picked up their movement and the sprinklers shot out jets of blue-tinted water. Not evil, Jack corrected. Just tired of having my privacy invaded. Everything here is perfectly legal for ranch maintenance. The cattle guards keep livestock in. The drainage prevents flooding. The sprinklers keep dust down. Not my fault if somebody who shouldn't be here finds these things inconvenient. After Lee left, Jack walked his property line one more time. He double-checked that all his no trespassing signs were clearly visible. He made sure his security cameras had clear views of his newly modified driveway. He wanted to be sure he'd catch Deborah's next visit on video. That evening, he sat on his porch with Rusty by his side, sipping a cold beer and admiring his work. From where he sat, his driveway looked completely normal. You'd never know about the carefully engineered challenges lurking along its length. We're not being mean, he told Rusty, scratching the dog's ears. We're just creating natural consequences for trespassing. If she stays off our property like she should, she'll never even know these things exist. Rusty wagged his tail, as if in agreement. Jack checked his security camera feeds on his phone one last time before heading to bed. Everything was ready. Now he just had to wait. He didn't have to wait long. The very next morning, his phone pinged with a security alert. Jack checked the camera feed and saw a familiar white Range Rover approaching his property line. Right on schedule, he murmured to himself. Let's see how this goes. He watched on his phone as Deborah stopped at his gate, where he'd placed his largest private property sign yet. For a moment, he thought she might actually turn around. Then she drove forward, straight toward the first cattle guard. Jack smiled and put his phone in his pocket. He'd give her a few minutes to enjoy the full experience of his ranch's new defensive perimeter. Then he'd head out to have a friendly chat with his persistent neighbor. Come on, Rusty, he said to the dog. Let's go welcome our guest. Jack grabbed his hat and stepped outside into the bright morning sunshine. His security camera app showed that Deborah's Range Rover had made it past the first cattle guard and was now proceeding cautiously up his driveway. He could almost picture her face as she felt the bumps and dips he'd carefully engineered into the road. "Come on, Rusty," he called to his dog. "Let's take the shortcut." Instead of following the winding driveway, Jack cut across his property along a footpath he used for daily chores. This path would bring him to the blind curve just before his newly created mud pit. He wanted a good view of what was about to happen. As he walked, he heard the distant sound of a car engine revving harder than usual, followed by a metallic scraping noise. That would be the second cattle guard. Jack smiled to himself. So far, his plan was working perfectly. He reached his vantage point and crouched behind a cluster of bushes with Rusty sitting patiently beside him. The loyal dog seemed to understand. They were playing some kind of game and stayed perfectly quiet. Within moments, Deborah's white Range Rover appeared around the bend. It was moving slowly, and even from a distance, Jack could see Deborah leaning forward in her seat, hands gripping the steering wheel tightly as she navigated the uneven terrain. The pristine vehicle already had a coating of dust on its normally gleaming paint. "Just a little further," Jack whispered to Rusty. The Range Rover approached the innocent-looking patch of road that Jack had spent days preparing. From Deborah's perspective, it would look like an ordinary stretch of driveway, perhaps a bit damp from morning dew. Nothing to worry about. She drove forward confidently, and then, splash! Jack murmured with satisfaction as the luxury SUV's front tires sank several inches into the carefully crafted mud pit. The vehicle lurched to a stop. Deborah revved the engine, and the tires spun, flinging mud in all directions. The more she accelerated, the more the wheels dug in. Thick brown mud splattered the sides of her once pristine white Range Rover. Through the windshield, Jack could see Deborah's shocked expression. Her mouth hung open as she stared in disbelief at what was happening to her expensive vehicle. She tried reversing, then going forward again, but the tires just spun uselessly, digging themselves deeper into the soft earth. Finally, she stopped trying. Jack watched as she sat in her car for nearly a full minute, apparently trying to decide what to do next. Then she grabbed her designer handbag from the passenger seat and reached for the door handle. "Right on cue," Jack whispered to Rusty. Deborah pushed her door open and carefully placed one foot on the ground, trying to avoid the mud. Her white pants and matching blazer practically glowed in the morning sun. She stood up, balancing on the car's running board as she surveyed the situation. That's when the motion sensors detected her movement. The sprinklers activated with a soft hissing sound. Jets of blue-tinted water shot out from both sides of the road, catching Deborah completely by surprise. One stream hit her directly in the back, another splashed across her shoulder and arm. Her shriek echoed across the property. "What in the world?" She scrambled back into her car, but not before the blue-dyed water had left distinct splotches all over her white outfit. She slammed the door shut, but Jack noticed with amusement that she'd left her window partially open in her haste. A thin stream of water continued to arc through the gap, splattering the interior of her luxury SUV. Jack decided it was time to make his appearance. He stood up and casually walked out onto the path, Rusty trotting beside him. "Morning, Mrs. Whitfield," he called out cheerfully. "Having some trouble with my driveway?" Deborah's head whipped around. Her face, normally composed and superior, was now flushed with anger and embarrassment. Blue water dripped from her perfectly styled hair. "You," she sputtered. "You did this on purpose." Jack approached calmly, making sure to stay on the solid path that ran alongside the mud pit. Years of ranch work had taught him exactly where the firm ground was. "Did what?" he asked innocently. "Maintain my private road?" "Yes, I did that on purpose. It's my property after all." He gestured at the sprinklers, which had stopped spraying now that their motion sensors no longer detected movement. Those helped keep the dust down, important for ranch operations. And that low spot in the road is just natural drainage from my horse washing station. All standard stuff for a working ranch. "My car is stuck," Deborah exclaimed, pointing at her mud-covered tires. So it is," Jack observed, as if noticing for the first time. That happens sometimes with city vehicles. They're not really built for country roads. My truck handles it just fine, though. Deborah wiped blue water from her face, leaving a smudge on her cheek. Look at me. Look at my car. This is outrageous. What's outrageous? Jack said, his voice still calm but now with a hint of steel. Is you continuously trespassing on my clearly marked private property after multiple warnings. He pointed to the latest no trespassing sign visible just a few yards away. That sign isn't a suggestion, Mrs. Whitfield. It's the law. I am the president of the Sunny Meadows Homeowners Association, she declared, as if the title granted her special privileges. That may impress folks over in your development, Jack replied. But out here, it doesn't mean a thing. Your authority ends at those orange stakes marking my property line. Deborah fumbled in her purse and pulled out her phone. I'm calling my husband. He'll bring our other car to pull me out, and then I'm calling the sheriff. This is entrapment. Jack chuckled. It's not entrapment to maintain your own private road on your own private property. And while you're making calls, maybe you should phone a tow truck instead. That mud is pretty deep, and I wouldn't want your husband's car to get stuck too. He paused, then added, As for the sheriff, feel free. I have something to show him anyway. What are you talking about? Deborah demanded, clutching her phone. Jack pulled out his own phone and held it up. I've got quite a collection of security footage showing you trespassing, opening my storage containers, going through my personal belongings, all date and time stamped. I've filed 3 complaints already. Maybe this time, they'll actually do something about it. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Deborah's face. I was just ensuring compliance with community standards. Your community, Jack emphasized, doesn't include my ranch. Never has, never will. You have no authority here, Mrs. Whitfield. No right to inspect anything. No right to even be here without my permission. He took a step closer, still staying on the solid path. In fact, every time you've come onto my property uninvited, you've been breaking the law. I've been patient. I've sent formal letters. I've put up signs. I've marked my property lines. I've even had my lawyer contact your HOA board. But you just keep coming back. Deborah's phone rang in her hand, breaking the tense moment. Harold? She answered, her voice strained. Yes, I'm stuck on that horrible Miller property. You need to come get me right away. While she spoke to her husband, Jack whistled softly to Rusty and walked a few paces away, giving her some privacy. He looked out over his land, the morning sun now fully risen and warming the spring air. His horses were grazing peacefully in the distant paddock, unaware of the drama unfolding on the driveway. Jack felt no pleasure in Deborah's discomfort. He hadn't wanted it to come to this. All he'd ever wanted was to be left alone on his own property. When Deborah finished her call, Jack turned back to her. Your husband coming to help? He's calling a tow truck, she replied stiffly. He thinks the SUV is too deeply stuck for him to pull out himself. Smart man, Jack nodded. Listen, while we're waiting, maybe we can finally clear the air about a few things. Deborah crossed her arms, blue stains now drying on her once immaculate white blazer. Such as why you're so determined to treat my ranch as if it's part of your HOA, Jack said. This has gone way beyond normal neighborly concerns. Deborah's expression tightened. When we bought our house, the developer's plans showed this whole area as part of the Sunny Meadows community. There was supposed to be a park here, with walking trails and a pond. Instead, we have to look at... She gestured dismissively at Jack's barn and equipment. All this. So you were misled by the developer. Jack nodded. That's unfortunate, but it doesn't change the fact that this land is mine, legally and rightfully. It was never part of the development plan they filed with the county. Our property values are suffering, she insisted. No one wants to buy a luxury home overlooking a working ranch. Then the developer should have been honest about what was here before you bought, Jack said reasonably. But that's between you and them. It has nothing to do with me or my right to use my property as I see fit. They stood in awkward silence for a few minutes. In the distance, Jack could hear the rumble of a truck engine. The tow service was arriving sooner than he'd expected. Your outfit, he said suddenly, pointing to the blue stains on Deborah's white clothing. "The dye isn't permanent. It'll wash out with regular laundry detergent." She looked at him suspiciously. "You planned all of this, didn't you? The mud, the sprinklers, the blue dye." Jack met her gaze steadily. "I protected my property using perfectly legal methods appropriate for a ranch. The cattle guards keep livestock in. The drainage system prevents flooding near my buildings. The sprinklers control dust. Everything here serves a legitimate purpose." Pete, the tow truck driver, took nearly 45 minutes to extract Deborah's Range Rover from the mud pit. Each time the winch pulled the vehicle a few inches, more mud splattered onto its once pristine paint. By the time the SUV was finally back on solid ground, its white exterior had been transformed into a mottled brown canvas with splashes of blue from the sprinkler water adding artistic flair. "That'll be $175, Pete told Deborah as he handed her the bill. "Standard rate for off-road extraction. Would have been more if we'd needed the heavy equipment." Deborah's face tightened as she signed the invoice. Her designer handbag was now spotted with blue stains, matching her ruined outfit. "You'll be hearing from my lawyer about this," she said to Jack as she climbed back into her mud-caked vehicle. "I look forward to explaining to them how you were trespassing on clearly marked private property," Jack replied calmly. "And showing them my security footage. Maybe bring your HOA board along too. I think they'd be interested in seeing how their president spends her time." Pete gave Jack a friendly nod as he packed up his equipment. "Nice driveway improvements," he said with a wink once Deborah was out of earshot. "Very practical for ranch operations." "Just standard maintenance," Jack answered with a straight face, though his eyes crinkled with amusement. As Deborah's mud-covered Range Rover disappeared down the road, Jack felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He doubted she'd be back anytime soon. But just to be safe, he decided to leave his ranch improvements in place for a while longer. True to her word, Deborah did send a lawyer's letter 3 days later. It arrived in Jack's mailbox in a fancy envelope with embossed lettering from Wilson, Grant, and Associates. The letter claimed that Jack had created hazardous conditions with intent to cause damage to personal property and demanded compensation for the towing fee, car cleaning, and Deborah's dry cleaning bill. Jack handed the letter to his own lawyer, Mrs. Chen, who read it with raised eyebrows. "They can't possibly think this will go anywhere," she said, shaking her head. "She was trespassing on properly marked private property after multiple written warnings. You have video evidence of her repeated trespassing, including going through your personal belongings." "So what do we do?" Jack asked. "We respond firmly but professionally," Mrs. Chen replied, already typing notes on her laptop. "We'll include copies of your previous warnings to her, the survey showing your property boundaries, and mention the security footage. We'll also note that all modifications to your road serve legitimate agricultural purposes." A week later, Jack received a much thinner envelope from the HOA's lawyer. This one contained a brief letter acknowledging that Sunny Meadows HOA had no jurisdiction over his property, along with a check for $1,500, reimbursement for the legal expenses Jack had incurred fighting the fake easement claim. There was no apology, but Jack hadn't expected one. He was just relieved to have official recognition that his land was his own. For the next few weeks, Jack kept an eye on his security cameras, half expecting to see Deborah's Range Rover, or perhaps a different vehicle, coming up his driveway. But no one from Sunny Meadows ventured onto his property. What did happen, though, was even more surprising. One evening, as Jack was brushing down Thunder after a ride, a pickup truck pulled up to his gate. The driver, a middle-aged man Jack had never seen before, honked politely and waited for Jack to approach. "Evening," the man said, extending his hand through the truck window. "I'm Tom Wilson, the new president of the Sunny Meadows HOA board. Thought it was time we met properly." Jack shook his hand cautiously. "Jack Miller. What can I do for you?" "Actually, it's what I can do for you," Tom replied. "First, I want to apologize for all the trouble with Deborah. The board had no idea she was coming onto your property or trying to enforce our rules outside our development." Jack raised his eyebrows. "Really? I sent formal complaints to the entire board." Tom looked embarrassed. "Yes, well, it seems Deborah, was intercepting mail addressed to the board. We only found out when one of our members saw the dashcam footage from her car. Dashcam footage? Jack repeated, confused. Tom chuckled. Apparently her fancy SUV automatically records video while driving. When she was bragging to some board members about how she was handling the ranch problem, she accidentally showed the footage of herself opening your storage containers and wandering around your property. The whole board was horrified. Jack couldn't help but laugh. So that's why she suddenly resigned? The board asked her to step down, Tom confirmed. Some members wanted to pursue further action, but we decided a clean break was best for everyone. He paused. Especially after we saw what happened to her Range Rover on your driveway. Nice sprinkler system, by the way. Jack tried to keep a straight face. Just standard ranch maintenance. Of course, Tom agreed with a knowing smile. Anyway, I wanted to introduce myself and give you my personal guarantee that the HOA understands and respects your property boundaries. No more surprise inspections or bogus violation notices. I appreciate that, Jack said sincerely. Tom handed him a business card. My direct number in case you ever have any concerns. And we're putting up a proper fence along the development boundary next month, on our side of the property line, of course. After Tom left, Jack felt a sense of closure he hadn't expected. The battle for his property was finally over the HOA. Next few months, life settled back into a peaceful routine. Jack kept his cattle guards in uneven road sections. They worked well for slowing down delivery trucks that used to race up his driveway. He filled in the mud pit, though, once he was confident that Deborah wouldn't be returning. The sprinklers stayed, but Jack disconnected the blue dye feed. They really did help keep the dust down during the dry summer months. Jack occasionally spotted Deborah's white Range Rover, now restored to its original pristine condition, driving past his property on the county road, but she never turned onto his driveway again. And in late autumn, he noticed a for sale sign in front of her house. Moving on to terrorize some other neighborhood, I guess, he remarked to Rusty as they drove past the sign. 6 months after the mud pit incident, Jack received an invitation to the Sunny Meadows Community Barbecue. It came with a handwritten note from Tom. No HOA business, just being neighborly. The real kind. Jack thought about it for a few days before deciding to go. After all, true neighbors respected each other's boundaries but also looked out for one another. Maybe it was time to build some positive relationships with the folks next door. The barbecue was being held at the development's community center, a short walk from Jack's property line. He put on a clean shirt and brought a homemade apple pie from fruit grown in his small orchard. As he approached the gathering, he noticed a group of people standing around a large display board. Drawing closer, he saw it was showing plans for new landscaping along the border between the development and his ranch. The design included a row of trees that would create a natural privacy screen between the properties. "What do you think?" Tom asked, walking up to greet him. "The board approved it last week. The trees will grow to about 20 feet tall, giving your ranch privacy and giving our homeowners a nice green view instead of a fence." Jack studied the plans. "Looks good to me. Who came up with the idea?" "The new homeowners who bought Deborah's house, actually," Tom said, gesturing to a friendly-looking couple chatting nearby. "They used to live on a farm in Idaho and said they missed seeing open land. This way they get to look at your pretty horses without invading your privacy." The wife of the couple noticed them talking and walked over with a smile. "You must be Jack. We've heard so much about your beautiful ranch. Don't worry, all good things," she added quickly. "We're just happy to have some space and not be completely surrounded by identical houses." They also suggested we create a buffer zone hiking trail on our side of the property line, Tom explained. "Gives people a place to walk without trespassing, and the trees will clearly mark where our land ends and yours begins." Jack was pleasantly surprised by how thoughtful the plan was. "I appreciate that," he said sincerely. "It's a good solution for everyone." As the afternoon went on, Jack met several other Sunny Meadows residents. Most were friendly and seemed genuinely embarrassed about the previous HOA president's behavior. A few even asked for advice about growing vegetables in the small garden plots the HOA had recently approved behind their homes. By the time Jack headed home that evening, he'd exchanged phone numbers with several neighbors and promised to bring some of his horses to the development's Children's Summer Festival. Walking back to his ranch in the setting sun, Jack felt a sense of peace he hadn't experienced since the development first broke ground. His land was secure, his boundaries respected, and maybe, just maybe, he had some actual neighbors now instead of adversaries. As he reached his property line, he couldn't help but smile at the cattle guards still installed at his entrance. They'd proven quite effective at keeping unwanted visitors away, but more importantly, they'd helped establish what he'd been trying to communicate all along. Good fences, and the occasional strategically placed mud pit, make good neighbors. Back at his house, Rusty greeted him with enthusiastic tail wagging. Jack bent down to scratch the dog's ears. "Looks like things are finally settling,"